Okay, so now we've looked at counting in fractions, we're going to look at comparing two fractions. And here we've got 5/8 and 3/4. And the question is asking us to compare which one is the greater. So to do this, what we need to use is we need to use our conversions. We need to convert the denominators so that they're the same, so they can be easily comparable. Looking at quarters, we can easily turn that into eighths by multiplying by 2. And I've got the calculation here. So we've got 3/4. We multiply the denominator by 2 to make 8. That makes the denominators the same. But we've got to remember that whatever we do to the bottom, we also need to do to the top. So the numerator gets times by 2 as well. And then that becomes 6/8. What we can then do is we can turn the 3/4 into 6/8 because that's an equivalent fraction. And because the denominators are the same, they're easily comparable. Now looking at the numerators, 6 is bigger than 5, so 6/8 must be the greater fraction. So here we can see that 6/8 is greater than 5/8. When we give our answer, however, we do need to make sure that we replace our converted fraction back with the original fraction. So we now know, because we've done the conversion working out here, that 3/4 is the bigger fraction. So putting our original fraction back in, 3/4 is greater than 5/8. What I'd like you to do now is have a go at these using the same idea and put the less than and greater than symbol in the middle. So we're going to start off by looking at 5/6 and 2/3. Then you can have a go at comparing 2/3 and 5/9. And then compare 7/16 and 3/8. Pause the video while you do the working out and then come back and see if you were correct. Let's have a look at our first calculation then, 5/6 and 2/3. So when we compare 5/6 and 2/3, we're going to want to turn thirds into sixths. So we keep 5/6 the same, and then we take 2/3 and we multiply it by 2. 3 multiplied by 2 is 6. 2 multiplied by 2 is 4. So we end up with 4/6. If we compare 5/6 and 4/6, we can see that 5/6 is the greater. So in our original question, we can say that 5/6 is greater than 2/3. In our next question, we've got 2/3 and 5/9 to compare. This time we're going to keep the ninths the same, and we're going to turn thirds into ninths by multiplying by 3. When we do that, we end up with 6/9, because 2 times by 3 is 6, 3 times by 3 is 9. We then end up with 6/9 and 5/9 to compare. 6/9 is going to be greater than 5/9, looking at the numerators. So in here, in our original fraction, we would put that symbol like so. And on to our final calculation, 7/16 and 3/8. This time we're going to keep 7/16 the same, and 3/8 is going to be multiplied by 2 to make 6/16. So 3 times 2 is 6, 8 times 2 is 16. Comparing the numerators now, 7 is more than 6, so 7/16 is going to be greater than 6/16, and we put our symbol back in the original fraction. can use this same method to compare more than two fractions. So in this question, it's asking us to order the fractions from greatest to smallest. So the biggest fraction to the smallest fraction. And here we can see we've got three different denominators. We need to think about our times tables, and we need to think about, well, how can we make all these denominators the same? Here we've got the denominator of 20. Using our times tables, we know that 20 appears in the 10 times table and also in the 5 times table. So we can use that to help us. So here we've got the working out. We're going to keep 17/20ths the same because we're going to turn them all into 20ths. Now 11/10ths, to turn tenths into 20ths, we need to times it by 2. So 10 multiplied by 2 is 20, 11 multiplied by 2 is 22. So we end up with 22/20ths, which is an improper fraction, but we can still use it in our comparison. Here we've got 8/5, and we want to turn fifths into 20ths. So to do that, we multiply by 4 this time. So 5 times by 4 is 20, 8 times by 4 is 32. We then end up with 32/20ths, 22/20ths, and 17/20ths. Therefore, 32/20ths is going to be the greatest. So we convert that back into our original fraction. Now we've got it in order. So 8/5 is the greatest. 22/20ths is going to be the next biggest. So we turn that back into 11/10ths. And 17/20ths we kept the same. So greatest to smallest would be 8/5 as the largest fraction. 11/10ths would be next, and 17/20ths would be our smallest fraction. Here's one for you to try. 2/3, 5/6, and 7/12. Have a think about how you can make all the denominators the same using your times tables. Have a go and come back and check your answers. Okay, here's the workings out. So we've got 2/3, 5/6, and 7/12. Looking at the denominators, we can turn them all into 12ths. So this one, 7/12ths, we don't need to change. 5/6, we're going to multiply by 2 to make 10/12ths. 2/3, we're going to multiply by 4 to make 8/12ths. So we end up with 8/12ths, 10/12ths, and 7/12ths. Therefore, 10/12ths is the greatest, 7/12ths is the smallest. And putting them back into their original fractions, 10/12ths becomes 5/6, so 5/6 is the greatest fraction. 8/12ths becomes 2/3 again, that is your middle fraction, and 7/12ths stayed the same, so 7/12ths stays as it is. So we end up, the greatest fraction is 5/6, the smallest fraction is 7/12ths. This one is a little more challenging because we can't keep any of the denominators the same this time. We're going to need to change all three. To do that, you're going to need to find a common factor of all three numbers, and you are going to need to use your times tables for this. I'd like you to see if you can figure it out before I explain what to do. Have a go first of all, get as far as you can, and then come back to see how you got on. The The first thing you're going to need to do to be able to solve this is we're going to need to look at our 12 times table, 4 times table and 16 times table and find a common factor. So here I've listed my 12 times table, here I've listed my 4 times table, and here I've listed my 16s. I've circled the first common number that they have in each of those times tables. And the first number that they all share is 48. So you can see 48 I've circled in my 12 times table, 48 I've circled in my 4 times table, and 48 I've circled in my 16 times table. This then helps us to work out the new shared denominator. So 3/12 I know I need to multiply by 1, 2, 3, 4 to make into 48. So 3/12 times by 4 becomes 12 48. This time I've multiplied 4 by 12 to get 48. So I need to do the same over here. So 4 times by 12 is 48. 3 times by 12 is 36. So I end up with 36 48. And for the final fraction, 3/16, I've multiplied 16ths by 3 to get 48. So 3 times 3 is 9, 16 times 3 is 48. I've made all the denominators the same using my equivalent fractions, and therefore they are now comparable. So let's move on to the comparisons. So we can see here that 36 48 is going to be our greatest fraction. 12 48 is going to come next, and then 9 48 is our smallest fraction. So now we've ordered them in 48s, we need to convert them back into the original fractions from the question. So 36 48 was 3/4 in our original question. So 3/4 is actually the biggest fraction. 12 48 was originally 3/12. So 3/12 would be next. And then 9 48 was originally 3/16. So 3/16 would be the smallest fraction. Ordering these fractions from greatest to smallest would be 3/4, 3/12, and 3/16.